Minnesota Governor Tim Walz says he won't seek re-election this year as the welfare fraud scandal in his state continues to snowball. Plus, the Pentagon moves to censure Senator Mark Kelly for cutting a video with other Democrats that tells members of the military they can disobey illegal orders.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the Journal's editorial pages, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Kate Odell. Well, who says political scandals no longer matter? One at least does. That's the one in Minnesota involving a huge ripoffs of state and federally funded welfare programs. Governor Tim Walz announcing on Monday that he is no longer going to seek re-election and is going to devote the remainder of his time into office to fighting this fraud. Let's listen to a clip of the governor.
2026 is an election year. Election years have a way of ramping up the politics at a time when we simply can't afford more of that in Minnesota. In September, I announced that I would seek a historic third term as Minnesota's governor. And I have every confidence that if I gave it my all, we would win the race. But as I reflect on this moment with my family and my team over the holidays, I came to the conclusion that I can't give a political campaign my all. Every minute that I spend defending my own political interest would be a minute I can't spend defending the people of Minnesota against the criminals who prey on our generosity and the cynics who want to prey on our differences. So I've decided to step out of this race, and I'll let others worry about the election while I focus on the work that's in front of me for the next year.
Kim, running for vice president after a couple of terms as governor, it must be a lot. So maybe there's some truth to the idea that Tim Walz wants to step back from public life. On the other hand, it's kind of strange. He's acknowledging in this statement that there is real problem in these welfare programs, but he is also trying to punch back at the same time. Another line that he had was that Donald Trump and his allies want to make our state a colder, meaner place. I wonder what you made of the governor's statement and his withdrawal from this reelection.
You're so kind, Kyle. It's why we all love you so much. Thinking that he really was just beleaguered by too much work. I mean, Tim Walz is a political animal, like most politicians. When he announced his race in September, he very much wanted to be reelected governor a third time. And he was even closer at that moment to the exhaustion of that last campaign. This is something very different. He doesn't have a choice. And likely those are the words. I doubt this was a decision that he made solely on his own. He was pushed out by his own party. This has been a slow boil. Let's not forget that the first of these prosecutions were launched back when Joe Biden was president. So this is a scandal that's been going on, but it's only recently got some attention. And I think he thought that he could just brazen it out. He had done so up until now for several years, in fact. But Republicans are not letting it go. The media is finally paying a little bit of attention to it. It got some more steam this last weekend when a conservative journalist activist put out a video purporting to have exposed some, pretty high level fraud at government subsidized daycare centers. It's not clear that that's been entirely proven yet, but it certainly generated more attention to the story. And here comes his announcement. And I did find that announcement amusing in one regard. He said that, he couldn't defend his own political interests because he needs to defend the people of Minnesota against the criminals who prey on our generosity. His problem is that he didn't protect or defend them for the years in which this was happening. That has become a political vulnerability for him and his fellow Democrats. They are very worried in what they are hoping might be a good midterm year that his presence could hurt others on the ticket. And it's kind of close, interestingly, in Minnesota at the moment. Democrats only have a 1-seat majority in the state Senate. A couple of vacancies have, in fact, given Republicans temporary control over the state House. And then, of course, there's the governorship. And there's at least one Senate race happening in Minnesota as well, too, because Tina Smith is retiring U.S. Senate race. So there's a lot at stake here. And from what reporting we have, there was some hard level discussions over the weekends where I think Tim Walz was told that this was the will of his whole party. If he didn't even have them, it was going to be a harder path for him to be reelected.
Slow burn might be the right way to describe this scandal, because as you lay out, Kim, the first of these indictments, I think, came in 2022. So even before Tim Walz was chosen by Kamala Harris for the national ticket in the 2024 election. But it does seem like prosecutors started pulling the threads, and the whole thing now is just starting to unravel. I mean, here is a Associated Press headline from December. Half of $18 billion of federal funds for Minnesota-run programs may have been defrauded. It's some amazing quotes from prosecutors. This is a first assistant U.S. attorney, Joe Thompson. He says the magnitude cannot be overstated. What we see in Minnesota is not a handful of bad actors committing crimes. It's staggering industrial scale fraud. And so, Kim, one lesson of this, I think, is obviously, as a governor, you have to be on mind about how these programs are being handled, how they're being run in your states. But it seems also that there's an incentive problem, I think, baked into these programs, the way that they're set up and run, where the federal government picks up a huge part of the tab for these welfare programs. It leaves states almost too little incentive to police it, because it's not their taxpayers' money. It's Uncle Sam's money. So they're focused on what new programs, what new tax credits they can roll out. Those are the kinds of things that their voters care about.
Yeah. And by the way, just more on the scope of this and how huge it is. I was looking up some numbers, DOJ, and this is almost staggering, Kyle. DOJ has issued over 1,700 subpoenas. It's executed 130 search warrants. It's conducted over 1,000 witness interviews. 98 defendants have been charged. 64 of them have already been convicted. And you're right. In some ways, it's not surprising this is happening in Minnesota, because Minnesota is almost the poster child of the welfare state. It's been proud of it for years. You heard Tim Walz say in that statement, our generosity, they've been incredibly proud of it. What that means in practicality is that they have sprawling, huge programs that are not just the ones that are administered with the federal government, but additional ones that they tack on and do above and beyond. That really has created this almost Scandinavian style welfare state, and really calls into question a couple of things. One is, if we want a system that operates like that, one in which we're not providing temporary assistance to help people get back on their feet again, but you're operating huge transfer programs where you're essentially transferring money from people who are working their whole lives to many people who have just dropped out of the workforce and are not engaged in it anymore. But two, the question of, when you get to that size, can you even manage these programs appropriately and correctly and keep a tab on them? And just to give you some examples, I mean, in Minnesota has a working families tax credit, which operates alongside and similar to the federal earned income tax credit. Minnesota has a program where you can qualify for a preloaded debit card to pay for expenses. If you have, suddenly an eviction or a utility shut off, you can get help for that. Minnesota was one of the first states that decided that Medicare dollars, which are supposed to be for healthcare, should be used for housing subsidies. So they're all funneled into that. Obviously, there's all their food and food stamps and welfare programs, et cetera. Housing, childcare, paid leave, it goes on and on. And so there is a plethora of these programs, as you mentioned, that nobody really has much incentive to police. And some criminals realize that. They realize the enormous amount of money there was there, bloated by the fact that the federal government was sending more because of the pandemic. And that's when a lot of this started. And nobody was minding the shop. And so I think this is a moment for all of us to look. You're right. I mean, there is some specific, obvious blame for Tim Walz. Also, I would mention Keith Ellison, the Attorney General. Who knows what he was doing for the past, years while the feds were engaged in this. But there's also the simple fact that at some point we're going to have to acknowledge that if we have all of these sprawling programs of a Minnesota style, you're going to have massive levels of fraud because there just aren't enough people or safeguards to make sure that something that huge is being policed.
What's your read of the politics, Kim, on this, both nationally and in Minnesota? Some talk now that maybe Senator Amy Klobuchar might jump in to this gubernatorial race. And any broader lessons? I mean, it does feel to me like Republicans are often on the back foot when they, or at least they feel like they're on the back foot when these programs come up. I mean, look at the fight that we just had about these Obamacare enhanced subsidies, or about the work requirements for able-bodied working age adults in the Medicaid program. And Republicans have been stalwart on those for now. But does this suggest that maybe maybe the GOP, if it frames this issue right, can actually win this debate? And one final thought here, I guess, for me is you mentioned that the closeness of the state legislature in Minnesota. I mean, was that part of the calculation here too? Because for the first years of Tim Walz's gubernatorial his tenure in office, Republicans narrowly held one of those houses, and that was a real break on their agenda. And when the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, as it is in Minnesota, in 2022, won unified control, that's when they were able to blow out the budget and enact kind of their wildest dreams. And so maybe the pressure inside the party here is people watching that narrowness of the margin and thinking, maybe we could get Tim Walz over the finish line here, but if we lose one or two of those chambers, we don't want to go back to that divided government.
Yeah, Minnesota has been a kind of fascinating state level version of what we saw with the progressive collapse at the federal level. You suddenly get all the control and you can put forward an agenda with no restraints. The citizens of your state get to see what that really looks like, and they go, whoa, this is not really what we want. And you've been seeing that happen in Minnesota. That being said, I would put forward a big note of caution. I mean, Minnesota has long been what I would call the Republican version of what Texas is for Democrats. I mean, Democrats are always like, we can turn Texas blue, and they don't really manage it. And Republicans, every cycle, they throw money into Minnesota. They get candidates. They keep talking about how they're going to turn this state, which had been purple. It's looked more blue in recent years. Now, they've made some progress, notably in the state legislature, as just noted. They've clawed back some seats there and have narrowed the Democratic control. They're going to have a tough time in this election, no matter what. Walz's decision to get out probably does clear the decks for Amy Klobuchar. She is a 4-term senator. She'll be a very tough competitor. She's a former state prosecutor. She's been, because she was off in the federal government, she's been distanced from this entire scandal that was going on in the state, kind of clean hands, as it were. She's got presidential experience. She ran the 2020 presidential primary. By the way, she's won each of her 4 Senate terms by at least 16 points. In a state that I would also note that I think the last time a Republican won a statewide office in Minnesota was 2006, when Tim Pawlenty was reelected to governor. So that's been a while. The Republicans are putting forward some people, in particular the Minnesota House Speaker, Lisa DeMuth, Mike Lindell, the chief executive of My Pillow and an ally of Donald Trump, is also in the race, although that could bring some real liabilities given some of the troubles that have plagued him. So I put this in the category of something that Republicans have been given a big opportunity, but it remains a very hard state for them to compete in. Nationally, you are right. The Republicans need to be all over this, but what I would love to see is them talking about the right issues. The administration has focused greatly on the Somali aspect of this. They are sending huge numbers of ICE officers to Minneapolis and engaging in arrests and sort of trying to really focus this on an immigration question. To me, this is a welfare failure. And for a Republican Party that continues to claim that it wants to reform the welfare state, that it wants to cut spending, this is a great issue to hang it on. But they need to be out there and kind of bravely talking about some of these problems and bravely offering some solutions for how we trim those sails and also reform those programs to provide more oversight.
Let's turn to the Pentagon's censure of Senator Mark Kelly. Here's the statement on social media on Monday from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. 6 weeks ago, Senator Mark Kelly and 5 other members of Congress released a reckless and seditious video that was clearly intended to undermine good order and military discipline. As a retired Navy captain who is still receiving a military pension, Captain Kelly knows he is still accountable to military justice. The secretary goes on to say that there is a formal letter of censure that is being placed in Kelly's military personnel file. They are beginning an administrative action to initiate a retirement grade determination proceeding. Let's start with a piece of this video that Pete Hegseth is talking about.
This administration is pitting our uniformed military
and intelligence community professionals
against American citizens like us. You all swore an oath
to protect and defend this Constitution.
Right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad,
but from right here at home. Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
Kate, what do you make of this dust up? First, the video that these Democrats released, and then this response from the Trump administration.
I think the video is the place to start because I think it was a lapse in judgment by Democrats for a few reasons. I mean, I think fundamentally they are evincing a pretty low opinion of the chain of command in America's military. They are basically sending a message to young sailors and airmen. Your leadership might not be trustworthy. They might tell you to do illegal things. And the very fabric of the military is the certainty that young people and young men and women will follow orders, often into harm's way. So I do think that was a mistake. It's also done in this innuendo fashion. They don't say, don't follow orders to strike a drug boat. They just remind everyone that they don't have to follow illegal orders, which any member of the U.S. military would know. And then they leave the rest up to everyone's imagination. And it also, I think, evinces a really low opinion of America's flag officers, that they would be just ready to follow illegal orders or unscrupulous in how they carry out their own obligations. And so I think Captain Kelly should have known better than to engage in that. And it just leaves this larger perception that military operations are just another partisan football, that the men and women left to carry out these operations, that if they make a mistake, if they make a bad decision in real time, that it could become just like a larger Washington imbroglio. So I go through all that because I think it's important that this event did start with an unforced error by Democrats that just looks like more partisan posturing and will not help anybody or help anybody make better decisions, especially in the U.S. military.
The Journal's editorial on this says that the video is a truism, and I like that. That seems to fit because what they are essentially saying in this video, including Mark Kelly, is, hey, members of the military, doing illegal things is illegal, and we are here to remind you of that. And what you're suggesting is that the point is innuendo into politics to let listeners use their imagination. Ooh, what is Trump ordering today? Or what did he order yesterday that might be illegal, that somebody might refuse an order to do? You know, I mean, you could talk about these boat strikes in the Caribbean. You could talk about the orders of National Guard into many of these cities, and they are declining to take a position substantively on whether those specific things are actually illegal and whether members of the military should disobey those orders. Let's listen to Mark Kelly. This is him this week speaking with Jon Stewart on The Daily Show.
If a reasonable person would think that this thing that they are asking me to do is illegal, you have an obligation. It's not an option. You have an obligation not to follow those orders.
So are the boat strikes illegal?
Well, so I've been asking this question for a long time. I'm on the Armed Services and the Intelligence Committee.
Right.
They have some complicated legal rationale, 40 pages of why these are legal. It's questionable at best. And by the way, at first it was fentanyl, then it was cocaine, then it was about regime change, then it was about oil.
I understand.
So,
but do you see my point? You yourself
I totally
are saying,
see your
like,
point.
I don't.
But
I don't know.
Our point is to members of the military who don't get reminded of this often. When something is clearly unlawful, you have an obligation not to follow those orders.
Kate, it doesn't sound to me like exactly a pretty simple thing. Again, Mark Kelly is putting a bug in the ears of these people who are on the front lines being told to hit that boat in the Caribbean that is allegedly carrying cocaine or other drugs toward the United States, or, stand on the street corner in Washington, D.C., and suggesting you don't have to follow illegal orders. But then he's asked a specific question, is this illegal? And he says, I don't know. They got a 40-page rationale. We're looking at it. And he's a very experienced guy, not to mention a United States senator.
Right. I mean, and he, in that video, he calls on his authority as a retired Navy captain to speak directly to members of the military. And so I think Americans are right to object to that and think that that was bad judgment. And to the point about the murky legal authority, I mean, Senator Kelly in that video, he did not just say, if you are presented with something that you think might be illegal, work it through the chain of command in this fashion. He said, you have an obligation not to follow that order. And so it does cross into this territory of exerting pressure on junior officers and sailors to not follow orders. So it does have that flavor to it. And it also, it reminds me a lot of the Biden administration's attempt in 2021 to turn the military upside down, looking for non-existent right-wing extremists, reminding them of all of their oath, and really kind of insulting, I think, service members that they didn't understand what that oath meant. And I think this is another example of that. And I think Democrats should really have more confidence, especially Senator Kelly, who spent, decades in the U.S. Navy serving, that the system can survive stress test against it, and that it's not that illegal orders are not a major risk facing sailors every day in their job.
Let's turn to the Trump administration's response then. It sounds like we're of one mind on this being poor judgment by these Democrats. On the other hand, the statement from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth saying it is a seditious video, a seditious internet video. Where do you draw the line here between what was a bad judgment, reckless maybe, and sedition the defense secretary is talking about?
Right. I do not think this mistaken video amounts to seditious statements. I think, first of all, it was a bad political look for the Democrats for all the reasons we just described. And instead of rebutting the substance and pointing out to the public just what a silly conceit that was from Democrats, of course, now the Trump administration is blowing it into sedition, which I think is just an unforced error. But I think, too, the administration has started reviewing Senator Kelly's retirement. It has placed a letter of censure in his personnel file. I don't think that there is much public appetite for this kind of public retribution on a U.S. senator for what he said in a video that luckily most sailors and Marines are not going to watch members of Congress or take their opinion all that seriously. But now we've initiated this disciplinary proceedings, and a quick word on some of that. A letter of censure is basically details a person's offenses and is placed in their personnel file, in their military personnel file. And I think it's regrettable to use this tactic. In other cases, for instance, during an investigation into Fat Leonard, who was the corrupt contractor in the Pacific that ensnared a lot of U.S. military officers, oftentimes the services did use these letters of censure to put allegations into the public space that they couldn't necessarily prove at a court martial or a charge. And so letters of censure, I think, can be used as unfortunate ways to smear officers or kind of put reputational damage to them in the public view. And I thought, I'm that just as a tactic, I was disappointed to see them going that route. But then second, now they're going to start this retirement grade proceeding where they basically review whether Senator Kelly should keep his pension at a captain's level of retirement. This sometimes happens in cases of real misconduct when somebody is retiring from the service. And even in those cases, I would say it's unusual for someone to be bumped down from their rank in retirement. And in this case, Senator Kelly has already said he's going to fight the proceeding. He's going to have a chance to defend himself to that board and explain why he doesn't deserve to lose his pension. He is undoubtedly going to have a lot of high flight Washington lawyers interested in defending him, because this case will the eventual court case will also surely include questions about whether the administration's retaliating for his political speech, basically. And so I don't think this is a political winner for the Trump administration. It looks just plainly retaliatory. I don't think it will amount to anything on the substance other than a protracted fight. And to wrap up, we should probably talk a little bit about the ways in which we will alienate Democrats from supporting Trump's defense and foreign policy agenda.
Well, and also it seems like a protracted fight would only build up Mark Kelly in the eyes of his supporters, while, by the way, distracting from everything else the Trump administration wants to do. I mean, what a move here, just days after the highly successful, amazingly successful extraction of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, while everyone is still trying to figure out how that operation was planned and carried out by the incredible military forces of the United States, to have the defense secretary the Monday afterward, talking about a proceeding against Mark Kelly.
Well, I think that actually brings us nicely to one of the larger questions here, which is the country's really polarized. And so there's a lot of this going on both sides of the aisle. It's not exclusively a Trump phenomenon. But there is a sense in the Trump administration that they don't actually need to persuade anybody to come to their position. They don't actually need bipartisan support for their defense and foreign policy objectives. And I think that's wrong, and it's not supported by the historical record. And Republicans are quite thin in their majority in the House. They could potentially lose Congress this fall. If Trump is serious about fixing American shipbuilding, about expanding U.S. weapons lines, he's going to need bipartisan support for that. And there are still not as many as there used to be, but there are still some Democrats in Congress who are interested in those issues on the House and Senate Armed Services Committee. Mark Kelly is on the Senate committee. And I think it's a mistake to get bogged down in these retaliation games that, like I said, aren't really going to go anywhere. But when you need to actually be building out a broader public consensus on some of your goals. And like I said, right now, the incentive in American politics is not in that direction, but it is advice that I think the Trump administration will need to heed, even in its operations in Venezuela, if it wants the public to go along with that project and support it until it's finished.
Thank you, Kate and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.